You are tuned in to the Foxcast podcast, the one and only podcast devoted strictly to Ford-powered Fox bodies. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Foxcast podcast. This episode is being brought to you by Riccardi Racing. That is RICCARDI Racing.com. Online or at the track, they get you parts fast. Check them out today. Real quick, guys, wanted to say I know it's been a little while since we've done a podcast, and that's simply just a matter of time. As we were into the racing season, a lot of the guests that we wanted to have on the show were just too slammed, doing their day-to-day stuff and keeping up with the season. So now that things have kind of come to a close this fall with the racing season, we're going to try and ramp those shows up and get those out there for you. So keep an eye out for that. This episode, we have a very special guest. Mike Jovanis is on the show with us today. If you don't know Mike, he is True Street champion many times over. Has a pretty solid understanding of what it takes to win in True Street, and just got done completing drag week, and a ton of knowledge, ton of wealth of experience in that area of what it takes to make a car work on the track as well as on the street, which is no easy feat. So, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
We've been trying to do this for 3 or 4 months.
We have been. The whole preparation for drag week and the normal race schedule had us pretty buried for the past couple of months. So glad we're finally able to get it together.
Yeah, it's never an easy task trying to get the stars to align, but either way, we're going to make it happen. So, Mike, real quick, just give us a little backstory on the car.
Sure. My car is a 1989 Shadow Blue Metallic LX. I purchased the car from my aunt when she was about to trade it in back in 1997. It was an automatic car with a couple of tasteful mods, and it sort of started the normal path of Fox body bolt-on modifications. I grew up in Brick, New Jersey, so there was a large street racing scene in Toms River, New Jersey, on Route 37 and on a whole bunch of other roads. So we kind of did that whole thing. And at some point, you realize that sort of thing isn't okay anymore, and that you need to find something that is a little safer, more organized, to put your time and effort in and guide the car to. So we had been watching and participating in True Street for a lot of years. I think some of the early True Street events, there was always an event at Raceway Park here in New Jersey that we ran in, and we had been watching cars like Chris Escobar's for a lot of years. I think we actually saw that car run before he owned it here at Raceway Park when Jake LaMotta used to drive it, and we just thought it was sort of the coolest class that you can take these cars that run killer times in the quarter mile and also get them to drive on the street and be fun and not just sit in trailers and garages. So it's probably 2009 or so we pulled the car apart and began on the journey to put something together that made some power and could potentially compete in True Street. And it's kind of spiraled from there, I guess you could say.
Right, and True Street is one of those classes where you can take anything out. I mean, they have 14, 13, 12-second classes, so, it's one of those versatile classes that just about anybody can run. But what's interesting about your car is you didn't want to just run. You wanted to, basically take the class over and be the champion and do that. Maybe not necessarily when you started, but now, you have to be in the 8s and the 7s. So, what did it take to really get your car to the top of the heap as far as True Street goes?
So I think if you ask the question more from power and how do you make the car win and go fast, there's probably a set of things that are in that bucket that are the ones that are almost easier, because anybody can purchase an engine and trans and bolt a turbo on it and make a whole bunch of power. The really hard part is the small nuanced things that are required to take something that makes 1,500 horsepower and make it street drivable. So in the power department, I've been working now with Anthony DeSoma at DeSoma Racing Engines on our engine program, and Anthony actually helps me out with a whole lot of other things. Just a very knowledgeable person in terms of racing, engines, turbos. He claims he's only an engine builder, but he knows a lot of other things and has been helpful to the program. And I've worked with Hughes in Arizona on transmissions, and now more recently I've been using their converters also. So I think what I'd say about those two areas are, for True Street, you have a lot of other things that are going to be your focus and that you need to make work right. So if you can really nail down engines and transmissions and have them not be a distraction for you, and have those parts of your program get stabilized, then you're able to focus on what I would think are probably the harder parts of the program. So the power making part of it is one thing. The finesse to make it drive on the street is probably the harder part of the equation, which we can certainly go through some of those points too.
Yeah, definitely. That's really what I wanted to discuss was, how do you keep the engine cool? How do you, set up the tunes to make it live? How do you set up the suspension? Just point by point, those things that maybe aren't the sexiest part of going fast, but they are the necessary parts to be competitive.
Absolutely. So cooling, let's cover that first, because that's probably the most critical component, especially on a turbo car. Turbo cars create and retain a lot of heat under the hood because you have hot side piping before the turbo that there's a lot of that piping, and it gets extremely hot because you have back pressure and backed up exhaust in those pipes. I think the first thing is, when you think about your front end layout, you can't put a whole bunch of things in front of the radiator that are going to prevent airflow. And that was one of the mistakes we made earlier on. You're accustomed to seeing transcoolers sit in front of the radiator, but if you put a transcooler that's big enough to cool a turbo car down in front of your radiator, you're obstructing a lot of airflow. So where we ended up in terms of transmission cooling first, we have two small transmission coolers with fans on them, one that's in my driver's inner fender well, and the other one is where the driver's muffler would be on a stock car. Both of those have thermostatically controlled switches on them, so the fans automatically come on and off with transmission temperature. And a later addition to the car, which I actually think made the biggest difference with transcooling, Mazir makes a aluminum power glide transmission pan that allows you to circulate engine coolant through the transmission pan. That part simply works awesome on a True Street car. And the ironic thing about it is they designed it for the inverse case for a bracket car to heat the transmission fluid up. But in the case of a True Street car, you're able to circulate engine coolant through the transmission pan while the car is off, because you can still use your electric water pump and electric fans on the radiator. So I think for those people that are running power glides, that pan isn't inexpensive, but if you think about the insurance that it provides in terms of keeping your transmission cool, I think it's probably one of the better investments that I've made from the cooling perspective. So on the trans side, it's two coolers with fans plus that Mazir pan. On the radiator side, I have a 55 gallon per minute Mazir electric water pump, which it's been the same pump that's been in the car now since I built it, so 6-7 years now. We did go as far in drag week to bring a spare motor for it. Didn't need it. Was able to send it back. It's definitely a part that's pretty bulletproof if you look at what I've put it through. I have a 2-inch aluminum radiator, kind of a standard. I believe it's Ron Davis. I think that did actually come from Rick Riccardi, your sponsor of the session. And I have a set of dual fans, 2800 CFM dual fans. The reason for the dual fans is it actually gives you a little more clearance under the hood because the profile of the fan is lower. And with a lot of turbo piping and things, I think the dual fans fit a little bit better. That fan and radiator combo works really well as long as you're able to get sufficient airflow through the radiator to the point that I made earlier. So I think that's it from a cooling perspective. On a turbo car, it's probably the transmission part that's harder. And believe it or not, True Street's worse than Drag Week, because in True Street you're making 3 immediate back-to-back quarter-mile passes, and that generates a tremendous amount of heat, bringing the car up in the trans brake 3 times. So by the end of that third pass, the trans is usually pretty hot. So I've found that the ability to cool the trans down with that Mazir pan really helps a lot. So it's kind of the combination of all of those different things that works together. Does that help answer the question on the cooling front?
Definitely. I had no idea they made a pan like that. That's super cool information.
It is. And it's one of those things where they kind of didn't realize what they had created when they made it, I don't think. Because I guess bracket cars have a problem with the transmissions not performing consistently when they're not at a consistent temperature. So that was why they originally made the pan.
Definitely. So, let's get into the engine management a little bit. I know that you have a Haltech system on there, and you've been working real close with them. What's some of the nuances there that you've been trying to struggle to work through?
So I think my struggle came before I had the Haltech. I had used an Excel Gen 7 DFI, which just has a very limited set of capabilities. I think the two things that I was struggling with there is very limited data logging capability and very little expansion capability from an input and an output perspective. And you sort of are just plagued with some of those older technologies by having 10 different boxes in your car. You have an engine management system, you have multiple MSD boxes, boost controllers, you have wiring all over the place, boxes all over the place, and you kind of never know exactly what's going on with the car. So where we are now, I think, is sort of the end state of that evolution. I have a Haltech Elite 2500T. The T means I have the torque management capability, which is Haltech's traction control, and we've eliminated all of the other electronics in the car. So there's no MSD equipment, no standalone boost controller. The Haltech controls everything. And what that really means is simplicity and really good data logging, and it allows you to really understand what the car is doing without struggling with multiple data logs and multiple boxes. One of my goals with that engine management system was to minimize driver distraction. I have everything controlled by the engine management system. So my fans are controlled thermostatically. My boost control is activated the right way. Everything is controlled in a way that it does not require a lot of driver input. I have a trans brake, a line lock, and that's pretty much it in terms of driving. One of the things that we did that was sort of progressing things a little bit further, for Drag Week, we set the car up to be able to run on pump gas. And we didn't do that by creating an entirely separate file and tune. The Elite has the ability to add another dimension to any number of different tables. So we put a knob on my radio panel on the center console that allows us to switch it from a race gas to a pump gas tune. And when I make that switch, it's toggling versions of the target air fuel, VE, timing, and fuel prime pulse, because we did discover that the car starts a little bit differently with race gas versus pump gas in it. So it doesn't require loading files and using a laptop. You literally just turn the knob and you can run on either. We did learn some things that after running C16 for a long time, pump gas is different. It on my car was rich. It needed a little bit less pump gas for driving on the street than it did C16. And the car actually runs hotter with pump gas in it. It runs about 10 degrees cooler with C16. So not within the range where it was a problem, but certainly a noticeable difference between the two. The data logging we have is excellent. You can almost think about something like a Gen 7 DFI where you're kind of ignorant to what's happening with the car, so you feel good about it all the time. We data log 40 different channels now with the Haltech, so we have an acute sense for everything that's happening. We're data logging EGTs on every cylinder. We're data logging a whole bunch of turbo-related metrics, pressure before and after the intercooler, temperature before and after the intercooler, back pressure, converter line pressure. we have a tremendous amount of intel into what's happening with the car, and it lets you sort of continuously refine the program. With something that's a less sophisticated engine management system, you may feel good about what you're doing, but you kind of you don't know. you just don't have visibility to all of those things. So you could have problems that you simply don't know about. Engine management systems probably a longer topic, but I think those are some of the things that we've done to make the car work right on the street.
That's an incredible amount of information that you've got coming in, but I mean, if you want to go fast and you want to have that that street ability and all of that, I mean, you pretty much have to have that type of information.
Yeah. Fuel system's another good topic. Do you think we can cover a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
So the dilemma with a fuel system is supporting high horsepower, but also survive street driving. When you put really big fuel pumps on cars, in a return style fuel system, they circulate a lot of fuel through the engine compartment, and you can ultimately end up in a scenario where you're boiling the fuel, overheating fuel pumps. So after I kind of have struggled through some things that didn't work on my car, and we did have problems over the course of time, not necessarily with heat, but with some of the street style fuel tanks. They result in a lot of slosh going down the track, and you could actually wash fuel away from the pickup. So where we are now is all Weldon parts, a Weldon D2035A pump, and a set of pre and post filters from Weldon, a Weldon fuel pressure regulator, and a Weldon pump controller, which is what lets us run that large pump on the street. It basically turns down the pump by way of pulse width modulation, so it's circulating much less fuel when you're driving on the street, and it prevents that scenario where you're boiling fuel and creating a heat scenario that hurts the pump. That made it through drag week, 1,100 miles, with not a peep out of the fuel system. Wow. On the fuel tank and other parts, and we've worked closely with Chris Hemmeter at BBRC, Behind Bars Race Cars. I'm on my second fuel tank from him because I did have problems with another brand of tank that wasn't properly baffled. And his tank is just a work of art in terms of fabrication. It has baffles that go from the bottom of the tank to the top, and it has a sump and a design in the back that would protect you in the event that you went up on the back bumper or wheelied. Everything fits together very nicely. And we're also using his fuel rails under the hood and a number of other small parts. For a street-driven application that needs a stock location tank, but also has the kind of G-forces that create a fuel slosh problem, Chris's tanks are awesome. And they look great too. We did have to put a second tank in the car when I put the 315/60 tires on it, because if that tire gets into the passenger side of a factory width fuel tank. So Chris made us one that's a little bit shorter, but he did build a box out in the front of the tank so that we still have about the same fuel capacity, because we are concerned for things like drag week where you really do need a decent amount of fuel in the car. Some people use fuel coolers and run pumps at full speed. The problem that ultimately happens when you get real fast is that the things that are out there that can be used as a fuel cooler don't flow enough fuel in order to work in the fuel system. So the pump controller probably becomes your only option as you reach a level of power that really needs a lot of fuel. The obstruction caused by that fuel cooler will ultimately cause you a problem.
So what's the capacity of your fuel cell?
It's an actual fuel tank. It's under the car in a factory location. I think it's probably about 13 or 14 gallons because when we were. That's kind of my rough math based on when we were at drag week draining fuel out and putting fuel back in. When we had put about 3 gallons into the tank or so, it would take about 10 gallons at the pump. So it's probably a little bit short of what a factory fuel tank is, but pretty close. The car actually gets better than 10 miles to the gallon driving on drag week, so it actually wasn't too bad to get keep enough fuel in the car at regular gas. It still has a regular filler neck, regular filler door, and everything. You kind of put gas in it like it's a regular car.
Nice. All the goodies inside.
Yeah.
I know you had a pretty close call a few years ago with the car kind of getting squirrely, and you made some changes with it at that point. What's going on with the suspension? What's the setup?
So yeah, that's a whole other interesting topic with these True Street cars. There's a school of thought that you don't really want to go beyond an 850 legal cage and something that's really a street oriented setup in these cars. And I was kind of that mindset. But it only takes one incident like I had last year to scare you into realizing that these cars aren't toys anymore and that it can go bad really quickly, and that you may want to have the proper safety equipment. I had the car get loose on me probably over 150 miles an hour at Norwalk. We still aren't sure exactly what happened. The video does look like something jars the car, but we never found an obvious reason why it occurred. But it did make us take a really close look at the chassis. I had a lot of damage in my upper torque box area, even after having welded the torque boxes and putting battle boxes in, like many people do. My floor pan was fatigued to the point where it was moving significantly under force. So I did make the decision that rather than slow the car down, safety is probably more important. And I sort of went into that area that a lot of us had been hesitant to in terms of 25.5 cage and everything else. After watching the work that Matt Wirt at Race Fab Engineering in Chesapeake, Virginia, after watching what he did on Rick Riccardi's car after Rick had his accident where he ended up on the roof, and talking to Matt, I made the decision to bring the car down to him. I had a lot of what I would say specific requirements or the way I wanted the car built, and Matt really listened to it. I'm not going to say that he loved all of my ideas because he has a way that he builds cars, and what was very important to me were a lot of the streetability aspects, which don't make the same. It's easier to do things sometimes in a race car format than it is for a street car, but Matt's a great guy to work with. Even if he complained a little bit about some of it, he got the car exactly the way I asked him to. It has a 25.5 cage in it now, but we minimized the number of bars inside the car to just what was legal for the 25.5 spec. And he did some additional reinforcement under the car where I had problems. So the car now has a Racecraft upper torque box, which is tied both into the roll cage on the top and to the 25.5 frame structure on the bottom. And it's not at all attached to the floor pan anymore. So it completely changes sort of the structural integrity. Surprisingly, my lower torque boxes weren't in terrible shape, but he did do some additional reinforcement there. While I did this work, I looked at the cost of modifying an 8.8 versus selling the 8.8 and putting a 9-inch in. And I made the decision to put the 9-inch in while we were at it, as opposed to put a bunch of money into the 8.8. So I had gotten some really good help from the guys at TRZ and Florida in past years when we were down at the Bradenton spring break shootout. So I reached out to them. They made me a killer fabricated 9-inch housing for the car. And they amazingly somehow turned those things around in about a week, which I was impressed with. If you look at the art of fabrication that goes into it. And Matt did the rest of the work. The amount of work to fit a 315/60 under a Fox body is significant. It's a huge tire. So the car is lowered about as far as it'll go over the tire because that's 30 inches tall. It's at the point where there's about 2.5 inches between the axle tube and the frame rail. So that necessitated moving the anti-roll bar up inside the car because there's simply no room in there to get an anti-roll bar when everything's so tight when the car is lowered like that. It has the front end setup's pretty much the same. My car has almost entirely UPR suspension on it. The only things that we didn't use UPR for were custom fabricated parts and things like that. So I think I probably have most of the UPR parts catalog in there. I did use Mensker AFCO shocks and struts in the car. While that may seem like overkill right now, it was another one of those things like the 9-inch that if you're going to do it right, you might as well sort of finish the job when you go after it the first time. And the other thing I think I learned by this exercise was there's a lot of people that weld roll cages in cars that are skilled fabricators. There's a difference between that and somebody who's a chassis guy. And Matt Wirt is a chassis guy. The amount of detail that he puts into chassis setup and how the car is going to work was mind-boggling to me when I was used to, when I picked my car up from the 850 roll cage, we put it on the ground, rolled it out of the shop, and left. Matt probably spent over half a day on my car setting the chassis up and agonizing detail into every aspect of chassis setup. And that's probably the secret to why it works right now. It's not just about welding a bunch of things together. It's a matter of making it work right. My car almost always goes straight down the track now without having any chassis drama or spinning of the tires or anything like that. And I definitely credit that to the detail that Matt puts into it.
Right. Yeah, it's a science for sure. So that's and at that power level to be able to make that claim is just astounding. That just shows how many skilled hands you've had in it, and so it's definitely impressive because you see them all weekend long slip sliding, sideways at 150 miles an hour, and so it's no small feat for sure.
No, definitely not.
So to date, what's your low ET on the car?
The car right now has been 805 at 175.5 miles per hour. That 80, and it's been a bunch of 80s. That 80 barrier has been a hard one for me to get past. I think sometimes you have these points that are those magic barriers where you change a whole bunch of stuff, and no matter what you do, it keeps going 80. I'm hoping that we get past that in the next month or so, doing some testing. What happened to me this year is when you have the bigger tire, you're able to push the car harder. So as you push the car harder, you start to find the other things that aren't working in an ideal way. So we made a converter change, and because the more power we put in front of the previous converter, it just slipped more instead of went faster. And now where we really are is needing to control boost in such a way that it really gets after it after we launch. So there's nothing broken with that. If anything, I think we've made good progress because we switched to Haltech boost control, where our understanding of what's happening is so much better from the data logging. It just takes time to work through that. So we'll be back at the track this Wednesday and probably a whole bunch of additional times, weather permitting, before the season is over. And I think if we get that nailed down, we should be pretty solidly in the sevens. The net of it is we can probably get the car to handle a lot more power faster. But there's a little bit of finesse needed in terms of how you manage that with boost control.
Definitely. Yeah, it's not just a matter of, let's turn up the boost.
No, it's not. It's there's especially I have a 347 with a big turbo, either an 88 millimeter or a 94 millimeter turbo, and the way that a motor and turbo combo like that makes boost, and the way the boost ramp works is a lot different than larger engine combos with more balanced turbo setups. The best way I can describe it is it's kind of like a 2-cycle dirt bike. It comes on all at once and very aggressively. So once the car starts to get turbine speed, it's off to the races. So if you're too light, it doesn't come alive at all. Once you start to get into that point where the car comes alive, the boost just comes in extremely fast and hard. So getting the boost control to manage that in a way that works well in the car it just takes a little bit of time. But I think we're headed down the right direction. When you're not trying to push the car, this stuff is less of an issue, which is where I've kind of been in the past, where you're lazy or coming out of the hole and you're comfortable with a high 360 foot. That's easy to do. When you start to push the car harder, and it just gets trickier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's anything easy about a 1,500 horsepower car. But so real quick, you just finished up Drag Week. That was your first time, I believe, doing that. What was that experience like?
I would say it was awesome. For my short answer, it's just a incredible event that Hot Rod puts on. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. If you look at what's involved in that week, not even counting the prep going into it, you're racing in the morning, and then you're driving 6 to 8 hours, depending on the day, through back roads, small towns, stop and go traffic, road construction, detours we hit. The diversity of driving and the time in the seat and in the car, they just make for really long days. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot to do in a week time frame. I had Mike Galimi, who's been in an advocate of our space for years, as long as I've been doing this stuff. He put the idea in my head and volunteered to be co-pilot. We committed to doing it back in March. Believe it or not, the registration for Drag Week was while we were on the cruise in Bradenton for True Street. So I had a friend of mine help me out and get through the registration process, and then sort of didn't think about it a lot until we were a month before, and then we scrambled to get ready. So I think a lot of what I had already prepared for in terms of True Street really worked well on that trip, because we had been doing it for so long. But there's also a lot of other things that come into play when you're driving that long. We had issues with a lot of heat getting up into the car. So it just roasted our feet and our legs, because I have no sort of heat protection on the floor pan or up on the firewall. Mm-hmm. We had a couple of really small issues, like an O2 sensor going bad. We had one small crack we had to weld. But overall, I would say that the car went really well. It went an 818 average across 5 days, which, interestingly enough, is a faster average than I've ever done in True Street. True Street's 30 miles. This was over 1,100 we drove, because we got lost on the first day. One of the things they do to you on Drag Week is it's not up to you to get from one track to another. They hand you a set of turn-by-turn directions that you have to follow and take pictures in front of checkpoints. So the first day we completely screwed it up. We got lost more than once. We were stressed. We followed people that got lost. You think you're being smart following somebody. Next thing you know, you're 20 miles off the course. So the second day, Mike never stopped trying to figure the whole thing out in the passenger seat. He discovered that he could stay a step ahead and drop pins on Google Maps on the intersections that were coming up. And then we followed the pins. And we also got a good little pack of guys together that we stayed with, and we helped each other out. And we kind of got into a rhythm where we were able to get through it. So after that first day, I would say the drives were fun. The other thing, too, is that a lot of guys try to make a pass at the track and then immediately get on the road. What we discovered is it's harder to be driving when it's hot out, the sun's beating on you, there's traffic. We really enjoyed the days that we left later, and we were driving through back roads and rolling hills and farmland. Like, as the sun was setting, it was getting a little bit cooler. I think we had some of our better drives when it was that time of day. The camaraderie between racers at Drag Week was amazing also. With all the negativity we have around all the time, every time we wake up and look at the news and everything else, it's kind of good to see people being nice to each other. Mm-hmm. If you saw a car broken down, there were 5 people stopped around that car and people wrenching away to get that back together again. The things that were fixed on the side of roads, at the racetrack, it was nuts. There was a guy running in the 7s with 2 different cylinder heads on. There was an El Camino that caught on fire and burned up the front of the car. They somehow found enough wiring supplies to get it running, and they kept it going. People with broken valve train, replacing lifters, rockers, all these things happening on the side of the road. So that part's just cool to see people come together around an event like that. Even if it's cars that's bringing them together, I think it brings the best out of everybody that's participating. So I think we hope to do that again in the future. A lot of it's probably luck, too, that nothing broke for us. I'm sure it could go the other way. And you have a lot of parts in the car that you can make good decisions about what parts you pick, but parts still break. So I think we were part lucky, but also we work with a bunch of really good vendors, and we have a lot of stuff that's designed for the given intent. But I will tell you, we'll definitely put some heat protection on the floor pan and on the firewall to prevent the amount of sweating that was going on in the car was probably unnecessary. So definitely a cool event. We had a good time. Hopefully next year is somewhere that we can get to logistically, because they do move it around the United States when they do them.
Right. Yeah. It's probably the ultimate stress test for a true street car, I'm sure.
Not just the car; it's also a stress test for the driver and the co-pilot. Because remember, you have to be with each other for 5 days straight in a race car, basically towing a trailer, staying in hotels together at night. So I think Mike and I did pretty well with that. We got into a good rhythm. I don't think we had any points where we were going to kill each other. We had the one stressful day when the O2 sensor went bad, but Mike's been around. He's around racing constantly, so he's really good at not freaking out when things go wrong and keeping a level head. So he was kind of helping me keep my sanity as I was going nuts through that whole thing. So definitely as much a test for the people doing it as it is for the car.
Yep, looked like a lot of fun. I hope to cover that someday. But very, very cool. So as we kind of draw near to wrapping up here, what are you looking at going forward? Hoping to take home some more True Street championships. What's on the horizon?
So I think if you've kind of watched my program over the course of the years, I don't make big radical changes. I really try hard to refine what I have in the car. So this winter, I think we're going to be particularly careful not to make too many changes. I have some additional things I hope to do with Haltech that are refinements and engine management. I'm going to put a coolant pressure sensor on to put a safety in if I ever have a head gasket problem. We're going to make some changes to how we log brake pressure to control brake lights and rev limiters. We're going to make that all a little bit more bulletproof. I don't think I'm going to make any significant changes before Bradenton, just try to refine and get everything together. Next year, I think we are going to kind of stay the course. Drag Week made me think my home is really street car racing and not heads-up racing and class racing and that type of thing. So I think we'll do Bradenton, our local NMRA event at Maple Grove. We had a really cool top 8 race in Englishtown this year locally that was kind of, Street Outlaws inspired with a top 8, and you bet up and down the list. Hopefully they do that again. It would be great to participate in that. And even though we had a turbo problem in Kentucky at the NMRA World Finals, that's an awesome event in terms of the venue, the amount of people, it was just a cool event. So I think we're probably gonna add that back next year, and hopefully we have some better luck. Nothing radical. I think we're gonna stay the course, try to keep refining things and plug away. There's a little bit of an itch at me, I'll be honest, that now that I have a cage legal to 750, should I be doing something more radical to make some more power? But I'm trying to force that back down and be rational that we keep making it work, right? The other thing we're toying around with the idea of after Drag Week is putting a Gear Vendors overdrive in the car. One of the things, Gear Vendors sponsors Drag Week, and they give you a discount certificate if you place in the different classes that they have in Drag Week. So we were lucky enough to get a discount certificate for one. I'm kind of doing a little bit of exploration on that before pulling the trigger, but it looks like that could be something that really helps with street driving, and surprisingly doesn't weigh that much. So there's not a lot of cost to having one in the car. So we may play with one of those too.
Yeah, that would be sweet. I mean, talk about easing the pain a little bit on the interstate. But so as far as where we can kind of follow what you're doing, do you have like a website or Facebook page, or how can we keep up with you?
I do post on Facebook a lot of car related happenings. I also frequently on the Haltech website they followed a lot of what I've done, and Bear Brakes as well. So between those places, we pretty much always have updates posted. We try to make sure we're we're posting when we're out and about and getting things done. If anybody wants to see sort of the day-by-day chronology of the drag week experience, Mike Galimi did write a blog that was posted on Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards, or I guess that's Mustang 360 now is the website. So he did, I think there's actually 6 of them, not 5 of them, even though there's 5 days of drag week, because we had he did a post on sort of the experience of getting there and the first day. So if anybody wants to read more on there, Mike did a great job of writing all of that up. I don't think he realized what he was signing up for when he agreed to do it, because he was frequently writing them at 5 a.m. before we left. And I don't think we knew how long those days were going to be, but he still did a great job of that. So definitely check those out.
Awesome. I will put a link to those on the website under this episode's introduction, so if anybody wants to go check that out, I've read all of them. It's definitely cool. It's good reading for sure. So Mike, I really just I wanted to say how much I appreciated you coming on and sharing some of this knowledge. What I'm thinking we're going to do here in the future, if we can convince you to do it, is do a series of more in-depth technical episodes, to help guys with the different aspects of going fast in a car that has to live on the street as well. With the tuning, with the suspension, the cooling, all those things. So, I think that would be a very cool project. People would love to hear some of that information. But definitely wanted to thank you again for coming on and doing this and sharing some of your insight and knowledge and experience.
Happy to, and hope to do some things in the future with you. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Again, Mike Jovanis, True Street champion, drag week competitor. And Mike, before I let you go, you do have another Fox body at the house, do you not?
I do. I have a 1989 Selene convertible that is the same color as my True Street car. It's shadow blue metallic, which is actually a fairly rare Fox body color. And when I stumbled upon the Selene, I thought it would be the perfect car that I couldn't modify and make sure I kept it. So it's a weekend cruiser that had been sitting under a cover for 8 years. So it was in some rough shape in terms of needing mechanical maintenance and that type of thing, but we have that all straightened out now, and it's kind of cool because those are the cars that were just untouchable back when we first got into the hobby. They were crazy expensive. Now, sadly, they're sort of underappreciated, so you can get some really good deals on them. And even if nobody else knows what it is when you're driving around, you feel like a rock star when you're driving it. So definitely. We have fun with that one too. It's just not very it's not very fast. Your daily driver is probably faster.
Definitely a nice collection, but anyway, Mike, thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening. Please like, subscribe, share the show. We're trying to get the word out. We are the only Mustang, really Ford performance related podcast on iTunes. If you are an Android user, we are also on Stitcher Radio, which is a free app in the Play Store. And we're talking anything Ford performance. If there is any guests that you can recommend that you'd like to hear on the show, please feel free to shoot us an email. Caleb at the Foxcast is my email address. And we will catch up with you next time on the Foxcast podcast. Thanks again for listening to the Foxcast podcast. We are everywhere. Stop by and check us out. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and our website, thefoxcast.com. And we will talk to you next time on the Foxcast podcast.